Hello, hello. As always, I am your host, Jeff Gardner, and this is Lives of Adventure. In this episode, I'm talking with Hazel Findlay. Hazel is a professional rock climber and a performance coach who specializes in the more psychological aspects of performance. And if you know anything about Hazel's climbing achievements, this does not come as a surprise at all. Hazel has made a name for herself climbing not only hard, but also mentally challenging routes. In fact, I first became aware of Hazel after seeing her short film as part of the Real Rock Traveling Film Festival. The film documents her ascent of a route called Once Upon a Time in the Southwest, graded E9. And for those who aren't familiar with the British climbing grades, E9 roughly equates to hard, run-out 513 that offers only very difficult to place protection. You should watch the video on YouTube. It's absolutely guaranteed to make you feel a little sick to your stomach. Hazel and I talk about how she got into climbing, what climbing and traveling mean to her, and we spend a good amount of time actually talking about how she managed to become a pro climber and continue ticking hard routes, all while struggling with a serious shoulder injury. If it's not already obvious, and while you'd be hard-pressed to get her to admit it, Hazel has mental toughness in spades. We also spend some time talking about her approach to coaching, and broadly what she's hoping to teach and share with the world. I had a great time chatting with Hazel, and I'm so grateful she took the time out over the holidays for the call. I'm sure you're going to enjoy this one. So, as Tim Ferriss says, without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Hazel Findlay. Hey, Hazel, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're kind of squeezed in here between Christmas and New Year's, so it's going to be a bit of a quicker episode than maybe normal, but I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Cool. So for those people who don't know, and I'll go through this in the intro a lot more, but for those people that don't know, Hazel is a very well-known professional climber. Kind of came onto the scene a bunch of years ago now, actually, by doing a lot of pretty heady, pretty hardcore, fairly scary routes. And coming out of England, that's kind of no surprise. But Hazel, I guess I'd love to start by just asking you a little bit more about how you got into climbing and where that drive for climbing and that lifestyle came from.
Well, I definitely got into climbing through my dad, who was a climber. He had climbed since he was like 20 years old or something, and was really into it, quite a kind of big figure on the UK climbing scene. And he was also a mountain guide in the Himalayas. And so, like climbing and more generally like having adventures and being outside was something that was just normal for us from a really young age. And then I also did the competitions when I was young. I started competing when I was 7. I probably stopped competing when I was about 16 due to kind of just being more interested in outdoor climbing.
That's a pretty common, I guess like the competition thing is pretty common in that sort of exact pattern. Somebody starts in the gym, gets really into it, really enjoys it for a while, and then slowly starts to go, actually, there's this other side that becomes a lot more interesting to them. Do you feel like there was any specific thing that kind of tipped that balance, or was it just kind of going back to what you started at with climbing, which was outside?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I think my history is slightly different to some people in the sense that like outdoor climbing was always there for me. It wasn't like I started outside and then did the comp thing and then like went back to my roots. It was like outdoor climbing was always something I did with my dad. As soon as I became old enough to climb with other people, I also climbed outside with other people. So it's slightly different. I think the main reason I did the comps was because when I was a kid, that was a way that I could meet people my own age. And I think when you're a kid, it's way more fun doing anything with people your own age.
True.
And so I was like on the British climbing team, and we used to like go around and do all the international competitions, and it was super fun.
Amazing.
But then as soon as I got that community outside, then I didn't need that part of the comps anymore.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes total sense. And so, as a kid, when you were very first getting into climbing, kind of 6, 7, 8, 9, what are kind of the standout memories of that period for you?
Um, I guess, I remember a few of my first trad leads. I remember getting really scared on various routes. Um,
Tell me
I
a little bit
remember
more
my
about that,
first
I
trad
suppose.
fall.
Like, yeah, I'd love to know kind of like, one, how old were you when you did your first trad lead?
I don't even really know. I mean, maybe like 9 or something.
Young enough that you can't
Um,
remember the exact period. That's pretty
I
impressive.
do remember that my brother belayed me and my dad climbed, so soloed up alongside me in his flip-flops,
Nice.
checking whether the gear I placed was good. So it was obviously a really easy route,
Yeah.
that my
Yeah.
dad could
Well,
climb
you
his
would hope.
flip-flops
You would
next to
hope.
me.
Either that or your dad is
Yeah.
very, very strong.
Yeah, maybe a combination. Yeah.
Right. Right. That's really cool. And then, as you kind of progress through, finding friends and climbing and starting to do, more broadly, I guess, traveling and climbing. Um, Actually, let me back up there. So kind of roughly from, getting going with the British climbing team and starting to travel for comps and things, you've really been living on the road more or less full time. Is that right?
Yeah, well, so I kind of I only traveled and competed with the competitions as a kid, like whilst I was still at school. I never really did that as an adult. And then yeah, I left school when I was 18 and I went on a gap year, which is something that British people do when they leave school before they go to university.
Hmm.
And then I was at university for 3 years, but I traveled in every holiday I had, I would travel, usually abroad. And then as soon as I finished university, I signed a deal with the North Face. And I've been a professional climber since then, traveling. Yeah, so I haven't really been still since I was at school, I'd say.
Yeah, that's incredible. So, getting started so young in something and kind of continuing on for, the period of time that you've been climbing now, like that's, multiple decades. Do you find it kind of hard to keep the excitement for it going, or is it just so built into you now that you kind of can't imagine life without it?
Yeah, I definitely can't imagine life without climbing. And I've had so many injuries that I've had so much enforced rest from climbing that
Hmm.
I think that's kind of helps psych. But also, I do so many different types of climbing that I never like it. I do get bored and I do lose motivation sometimes, but then I just swap styles of climbing. And then, so I never really. I never like, oh, I just want to take a month off climbing. I have never thought that in my whole life, I don't think.
That's mental. I mean, like, I guess I asked the question because I know a lot of people who are, they're sort of bimodal. They're either like on with something or completely off with it. And they tend to kind of jump between a lot of different sports. And so, like I'm thinking of a friend of mine here who he's really into climbing and then he's completely done with climbing and he's really into skiing and then he's totally done with skiing and he's like really into surfing. And you're like, how can you do all these different things? Like this is, it's a little crazy, but, and then there's other people, yourself, it sounds like among them. I've got a lot of friends that are really into climbing that, are like this as well, that the psych just never seems to go away. So it's really cool.
Yeah, it's like, I kind of just consider bouldering and alpine climbing just they're so different. It's almost like doing a different sport. But, I'm experienced in both of them, so it's more
Right.
fun than doing something different. Although I am going surfing soon, and I have learned to paraglide, and I'm trying to learn how to ski. So it's not like I'm totally anti other sports.
Anti other sports. You're just really into climbing.
Yeah, I'm pretty into climbing.
Fair enough. So you did mention there that you have kind of fought some injuries, and I know the major one that you read about a lot is your shoulder injury that drug on for many years, and then you got surgery, and it took you close on 2 years to really get back from that. Is that right?
Yeah, and actually, I can't even remember the year. I think it might have been like 2009 when I first did the surgery. No, was it 2009? Sorry, the injury.
Hmm.
Maybe 2010. and it only really sorted itself out in 2017.
So you were just living and climbing full time, professionally, with an injury and like with pain the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, not the whole time. Like, so the sort of 3 years before the surgery, I could manage it up until the last year before the surgery. So it's sort of like this on and off thing. Like maybe I would do a climbing trip and have pain and like not really be able to climb very hard, and then the pain would kind of go away, and I could kind of manage it with physio and
Right.
and that kind of thing. But then the year before the surgery, I was just like searching for a year, like what's wrong with my shoulder, what's wrong with my shoulder, all these things.
In that way, was it a bit of like a relief when somebody was finally like, this is what's wrong with it, and we have to just go in there and fix it surgically?
It was actually, yeah. Yeah, I didn't want to have the operation, but it was so frustrating not knowing. That was kind of like the worst thing.
Right. So once you had the surgery, I imagine there was, I've read about it, but I also imagine there was this long kind of down period where, you are trying very hard to do the right thing for your shoulder and let it heal properly and, start to come back slowly so that you don't re-injure it. I guess just for someone who is a professional climber, who really lives the lifestyle, that enforced rest, I think I heard in a video you referred to, your bedroom as your prison cell at one point during that period. What was that like? I mean, did that feel like a prison sentence that you were sort of working your way out of, or was it a space to sort of explore some of those other things like paragliding?
Yeah, I mean, the different phases of the recovery post-operation kind of had their different challenges. Like directly after the operation, I was basically kind of bedbound, and just the only thing you can do for exercise is exercise bike and walking, and that was really hard for me, and made me realize like how much joy I get from having adventures outside. And then it was so funny. Like as soon as I could lift a bag, I went to India because I'd been like 3 weeks in Sheffield or something, and
right.
or in a city, mostly in my bedroom, and
you had
already that was like, yeah, I'm terrible. Yeah, I just get itchy feet, and I was like, I'm gonna do some solo adventure, and I like went to India and I did a meditation course, and then like did a 6-day trek and climbed a mountain. Amazing. And went on a motorbike adventure. Like
that strangely sounds a lot like my India trip.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a lot of people's India's experience.
Right.
Yeah, and I should have still been in Sheffield, like seeing a physio and doing specific shoulder exercises and like getting daily massages and all those things that you're supposed to do, and I just wasn't doing any of them. And then I got home and I still didn't want to stay in Sheffield, and I just got in my camper van and went to Chamonix and learned how to paraglide. And I wasn't the best at my recovery, which is probably what contributed to it taking so long.
Right. Yeah, this is also a very common story with athletes, especially. It's just that they just can't sit still after something like that, and they try to push it too quickly, too soon. And my wife is the exact same. She blew out her knee in Chamonix, actually skiing, when she was first learning, and ended up getting knee surgery. She's even a physio, so she should know better, but ended up doing exactly the same thing, like trying to get back into running a little too early, and trying to kind of push it a little too much too soon. And it took ages and ages for her knee to like properly heal.
Oh man.
Yeah, same thing. So you come out of the shoulder surgery, you come out of this kind of slow, long recovery period. And I saw a video recently, and it was a really well-made video, I felt, at least. It was 5-10 minutes, and it was talking about your ascent of mind control, which was kind of the hardest route that I think it was kind of the same level as the top grade that you would have climbed previous to the shoulder surgery. And I think the way that the video sort of portrayed it was almost you kind of coming back to being yourself almost. I know that was quite a while ago now, but how did that experience feel in terms of, coming off of the injury? Did it feel kind of the way that it was portrayed, in the sense that you were kind of becoming yourself again, or, maybe they just added that in there for flourish?
It did feel like that. Yeah. Yeah, it definitely was the mark of me being able to climb free again, I suppose. Like, for so many years, there'd always been this like little asterisk against my climbing experience, which was, oh, did I just make my shoulder worse? Or, oh, is my shoulder going to be hurting tomorrow? Or, oh, should I tone it down a bit? Or should I be doing this style of climbing, or these exercises? Or, there was always just like this mental asterisk on my climbing. And I think I knew that if I could do that route, because also the crux move is this like crazy shouldery move. Like you couldn't have a worse move for your right shoulder. And I just knew that if I could do that route, then that was it. Like my shoulder was recovered. And that was the case, like I did that route. And after that, I've had no problems with that shoulder.
Amazing. Very good. Well, congratulations on the shoulder. I do feel compelled to ask you about how your finger is, because I saw on Instagram there recently that you hurt your finger.
Yeah, it's such a pain. I'm just one of those climbers that just seems to be injured all the time. Because I had a bit of a finger injury the whole summer too. This finger injury is way worse. Like I can't even like hang on a pull-up bar without it hurting. Like it's pretty bad. Yeah. So yeah, I guess just being patient again.
You're getting, there's some sort of life lesson in here that somebody's going, I think Hazel really needs to learn a little more patience, so we're going to really whack her over the head with it a few 100,000 times.
Yeah, I don't know what it is that I'm missing, like what the universe wants to tell me, because I really felt like I learned it all, but
right.
But there you go.
The
way it is.
Yeah, I hope the finger heals quicker than the shoulder did, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess one of the things, and maybe this is a good transition into this, one of the things you're really well known for in the climbing circles is both your ability to climb pretty scary routes, routes where there is actually real legitimate risk and danger, and also your ability to help teach other people how to do that better when it comes to the mental side of climbing. And I know, you've talked about this with a lot of other people in several podcasts and written about it extensively, on the Black Diamond website, on your own website. So we won't go super into it, but I did want to kind of talk a little bit about, both the mental side of things and the mental training aspects, but also kind of your interest in flow and, kind of flow for peak performance and that sort of thing. And then kind of look at some parallels between a few other things in your life that seem to kind of, line up pretty nicely in those areas. So I suppose to start, how did you, I guess maybe is it just because you grew up in England and you ended up climbing on sea cliffs that you had to develop a good head for climbing?
I guess so, but I don't even know if I do have a particularly good head compared to everyone else. I think I'm pretty normal actually. I just think that I think about it more. And I probably work on it more, but I'm definitely not like super bold or anything. I've also just climbed a really long time, and I gravitate. I suppose this might be it. Is I kind of gravitate towards the psychological challenge of climbing versus avoid it. So like, even though I might find it hard, I'm not going to like not do a style of climbing because I think it's scary, for example. Like I'll just slowly build up my experience in that style of climbing, so that I can make it less scary.
Right. So, you're effectively practicing or training your mind just the way you would train your, fingers and arms and muscles and things.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And, I know you have spent a lot of time with Arno Ilgner, who I kind of my kind of initial climbing was all done in Virginia and North Carolina. So his name came up pretty early in my kind of climbing career, as it were. And I think, I've climbed a lot of the areas that Arno is well known for and have been terrified at many, many of them. So I guess I'd love to know a little bit more about, what do you feel like your style of coaching is in that area? Like if you got somebody who was saying, look, I've never really climbed trad, I'm pretty terrified of it. Or maybe similarly, if you got somebody who had climbed lots of trad and was still having trouble kind of getting over, climbing far above their gear, how do you kind of approach those situations?
How would I approach someone like that who came to me for help?
Yeah, exactly. So if you were coaching, because I know you do a lot of coaching with people on the mental aspects of climbing and that sort of thing. And I guess I'm just wondering, do you have kind of a set methodology in your head, or do you really just approach each person and say, okay, what's the first little step we can take and how do we start to move them along the path?
Yeah. That's a tricky question just because there's I have so much coaching content,
Mm-hmm.
Well, I kind of like to think about it in two different ways. This idea of mental training is you've got your mindset, which is like the general outlook that you have towards your climbing. So that might include something like motivation or like fear of failure or goal setting or, this kind of thing, like your general outlook, like how you think about climbing before you go to bed, or how you're going to choose which crag to go to or which route to do that on a given day. And then you have mental training in the sense of what do you do in the moment when you're distracted when you're climbing. So like something that can be incredibly distracting for many climbers is fear of falling or fear of failure. And you can build a capacity to deal with that as a distraction whilst climbing. So, the approach can take either of those depending on the person.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like sometimes, like I just show people how to do fall practice and they go away and they do it and their climbing improves. Their climbing improves. Or, I've worked with people over years and years because there's some deep ingrained stuff which is really limiting them with their climbing.
Interesting. And so in those cases, do you find it, do you find yourself almost in the position of a therapist where you're sort of helping them work through these deeply ingrained issues or thought patterns and try to break them out of those patterns?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I end up talking about so much interesting stuff on, because I do, so I'll do kind of workshops and one-to-one coaching with people face to face, but then I also do conversational coaching, which is just chatting on Skype like me and you are now.
Yep.
And the conversations I end up having are so funny because they end up just being so far removed from actual climbing, because that's what's cool about climbing, is that it's a holistic endeavor in so many ways, because it requires all of you. It doesn't just require you to have strong fingers and strong core. You need to be thinking the right things at the right time, and if you're not thinking the right things at the right time, then maybe that's the case in other areas of your life as well. So it's funny, like my training to become a coach, I didn't go to any kind of climbing workshop or training to become a climbing coach, and didn't do any of that. Like I went and did courses in mindfulness, and I did a coaching qualification, like a life coaching qualification,
Right.
which basically taught me how to speak to people and how to ask the right questions so that you can kind of invoke change from the person and not just like give them advice, essentially.
Right.
And I think that's helped massively because, all these other areas, all these other different professions, therapy wise, are are good at this stuff, whereas climbers are good at climbing, right?
Right. It goes, so goes the theory, at least.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So I suppose, in and through the coaching, and you mentioned it just there that you did a lot of mindfulness courses and you did a meditation retreat when you were in India. Do you feel like a lot of what so many climbers kind of get stuck on is that sort of attachment to whether it's sort of the outcomes of, performance? They ticked the route, they did the thing, they got the, acclaim from whoever. Do you feel like that's what's holding most people back, in those climbing coaching conversations? Is it that more than it is the physical performance aspects of it and the physical training?
Yeah, I think I see a lot the situation where someone is performing way below what they're physically capable of. I see that so much, and as soon as you start to notice it, you see it in everyone around you, and you go to the crag, and if people are saying take, then how could they possibly be performing at their limit? And so, yeah, there's a few things. I think the two most common things that limit people are fear of failure and fear of falling. I think they're the two most common.
And when you say fear of failure, do you just mean fear of not finishing the route, or like fear of failing in front of other people, or that sort of thing?
Yeah, a lot of fear of failure reduces back down to other people's perception of you. Yeah, I mean, we're pretty social creatures, and as soon as you enter a sport like climbing, then, your status, I guess, how you consider yourselves in comparison to other people is directly relatable to how hard you can climb.
Yeah, to a number system. Yeah, it's pretty unfortunate, and also like so socially, and I guess to our reptile brain, like it's such an easy thing to do. We're like, oh yes, easily. Okay, I can rank myself in the pack of animals here.
Yeah, exactly. And climbing's just it's a really difficult sport for that, because it's so goal and outcome orientated. If you take a sport like surfing, unless you're doing competitions or whatever, you're really just comparing yourself to yourself. It's really hard to make direct comparisons like that, although I'm sure it still happens. But because we have this grade system, and because success and failure are so well defined by whether you clip the chains or not, it's so black and white, we have this tendency to kind of devalue all of our efforts unless they result in ascent, essentially. So, I coach a lot of people who, they might have progressed massively in these different areas, but because they can't say that they've sent a certain grade, in their eyes, they're failing. Right. And it's just such a shame, because it means that people don't put energy into certain processes within their climbing. They only put energy into the outcomes.
Yeah, I heard you mention in another interview that that a lot of the flow training as well. And for people that don't know, they can go look it up. We won't even mention the unpronounceable Polish or whatever, wherever he's from, name.
Csikszentmihalyi.
There you go. You're good at it. You've had a lot of practice, apparently. So in any case, so flow theory is, and there's a very concise definition for it. Do you have that memorized as well?
I don't actually, but I could give it a go if you want. Or have you got it written down?
I don't have it written down. I should have had it. I've got a bunch of other stuff written down, but not that. So give it a go and see how we make it. And if not, I'll just throw it in the show notes.
Okay. Well, I guess it's being fully absorbed in the moment, but how it differs from mindfulness is there's this component of challenge. So you're kind of perfectly challenged. Everything kind of feels automatic. You kind of lose a sense of time. You're enjoying it, but you don't really know you're enjoying it until you come out of the flow experience. I mean, flow experience is usually categorized by when you come out of it, you have this like giant high. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
probably enough.
That's a perfect description of it. And I think it's one of the things that really struck me about flow was you were saying that flow is not this thing that is sort of like you can't attain it by going after it. Like it's not something you can just brute force your way into. You have to look for it, and there's ways you can increase the chances that you'll end up in a flow state on a given route or on a given climb. But the best way kind of to think about it is, you're sort of there to try to go through the process and try and find flow as a goal, as like if there was an outcome, that's the outcome. Using that process to look for that kind of elusive flow state rather than I've got to get up there and clip the chains.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I guess one way of looking at it is that just being present before you start climbing or prior to when you might enter flow state is important. And if you are thinking about having done the route, or that you really want to do the route, or you're too busy kind of imagining having already done the route, then you're not present. So yeah, it's like it's one of these really paradoxical things where you increase the likelihood of doing that thing if you think less about that thing.
Very, very interesting. There's a lot of, I also did a 10-day Vipassana course a couple of years back. And
oh yeah, cool.
I just find so many parallels between meditation and really any sport. Like I think most sports benefit hugely from, mental training, but also just kind of less of a focus on outcomes and more of a focus on process. And so I've always found that kind of fascinating that it has taken so long for so many sports, and also in the world of business, it's become a really big thing now. But, it's just, I've always found it fascinating that it took so long for those kind of parallels to come together and go, oh yeah, for somebody to kind of draw those lines together.
Yeah, I mean, it's taken people so long to even just accept meditation as like a worthy thing that we probably all should be doing, right?
Right, absolutely.
So, yeah, it's just, yeah, I think it got hijacked by, like faux spirituality, like, just, all the fluff that sometimes gets attached to it. It's almost like, dogma plus the practice. And right. I think that with people are finally realizing that actually just doing the practice in a certain way without all the other stuff attached to it is really beneficial for mental health, essentially.
Right. It's totally fine without the dogma, and it still works just as well.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's transition a little bit away from the mental and coaching stuff. I'll stop grilling you about your work, other than your work in the vertical. And I'd love to just know, we touched on it a little bit. You got into climbing very early in life. You were competitive quite early. And then you effectively transitioned into becoming a professional, and your life has been more or less on the road for over 10 or 15 years now. What is, like, we've talked about how you maintain kind of the psyche there, but do you ever feel like you're missing out, or that there's some balance missing in how that lifestyle is sort of built and how it has to function?
Do I think there's something missing in my lifestyle?
Yeah, just like, is there, I guess what I'm getting at, like, do you feel like it's unbalanced, in the sense that you're pretty much always on the road? I guess somebody could easily turn around and say the same thing about somebody that lived in the same house or the same town for, all 30 or 40 or 50 or 80 years of their life, that's sort of unbalanced in the opposite direction. But I feel like there's always kind of a general pushback to the kind of more nomadic lifestyles of, people that are out living in their vans and climbing all the time. And I say that as somebody who spent, several summers in the valley climbing and living out of the back of a van. So, I'm very sympathetic to it, but I suppose I'd love your take. And like, do you ever kind of feel like I'd actually like to stay put in some single place for a little while?
Yeah, it's a good question. I definitely travel too much, and it definitely affects me. Every year I say, okay, I'm going to spend like these 3 months in this place. I've been trying to grow roots in Chamonix for probably 3 years now, and it's just quite laughable, really. Like I'll be back for a month in the summer, and that will be the longest amount of time I'll be there for before I leave for a bit. And then I might come back for a bit, but then like the entire winter so like this year from October through to June, I will have spent 1 week in Chamonix, and that's supposed to be my home, right? So it's pretty full on. I spend a lot of my life packing and unpacking, and I think that's a side of professional climbing that people they kind of
they like to
they think
glamorize
it would be such a wonderful thing. Yeah, they glamorize it. Yeah, and when in reality it's actually kind of hard work. But also, I could stay in one place a little bit more. Obviously, I do have some obligations, and I do need to travel for work to some extent, but I could also change a few things in my life and stay put a bit more. So it's definitely not like, it's partly my own fault.
Right. I mean, there's trade-offs in everything, aren't there? Like you've got obligations on the one side. You could totally change your life up and do things differently, and those would all have different trade-offs and ramifications.
Yeah, and there's times where I've got quite stressed with it, and I've gone, right, I'm cancelling this, I'm cancelling that, I'm staying here for a while, and it drives my boyfriend mad because that's all I'll be talking about is how I want to stay in one place. And then literally a month later, I'll do some cool trip. And then all I want to do is travel. And this coming year, because like when I made a bunch of decisions about this coming year, I was really psyched on traveling and going to like new places. I have so many random trips in the pipeline for this year. And like my year is just filling up and filling up. And it's just scary because at some point I'll be like, oh no, I shouldn't have planned all these trips.
And do you kind of think that, I mean, in some sense, do you feel like you're sort of in a window right now where you're like, I'm climbing very well. I've got the opportunity to do all these amazing things and these amazing trips. And, it's sort of, make hay while the sun shines sort of situation, that you're kind of going, sometime in the future, I'll be able to change and go to the less travel lifestyle, but it's a bit of a one-way door in a sense, like unless you're in the position where you do have the ability to go on all these trips and plan all these amazing, climbing objectives and that sort of thing. I don't know exactly what the question is here, but I guess what I'm getting at is like, do you feel like you are making a kind of temporal trade-off of, okay, I'm doing this now because I can, and I wouldn't be able to do it later, potentially?
Yeah. I guess, if one day I want to have a family, then maybe, I'm not going to be able to do that much travel. But then, I bumped into a bunch of my friends this year in the Valley in Bishop who are families, and they're just living out of vans in Bishop. So, who knows whether it ever has to end, right? I don't know. Yeah,
totally true. I mean, you see, like, I think Tommy Caldwell's like that, Sonny Trotter's like that.
Yeah.
Like, they all have this quite, road-driven lifestyle, which is, I think, fascinating. I think it's really interesting, and I think it's commendable that people go and try to find the lifestyle that works for them, right? And they're not just going, okay, I'm just going to accept what everybody tells me is the norm or the right thing to do, and I'm going to go and push it in the direction that I want to push it in. And if I like it, great. And if not, I can always retreat back a little bit.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that's kind of how I've always lived my life. I've got that from my dad. There is this norm, of how we are supposed to live our lives, and that's really multifaceted. It's like how we're supposed to have a career, how we're supposed to have our relationships, how we're supposed to live in terms of geography. There's all this stuff, and you just have to. If that doesn't suit you, it suits a lot of people, but if it doesn't suit you, then you really have to be able to take some risks to change that, because otherwise you will just be unhappy with it.
Right, right. So I want to be a little conscious of time. I know we've only got a little while left. There's kind of several questions I try to remember to ask most of my guests, and I have remembered this time. So I will send you a couple of these questions right now, and we'll see how many we get through before we run out of time. So if you had to define adventure, just what is an adventure, or what does an adventure mean to you? How would you define what is adventure?
I think, because adventure is so relative, for one person, adventure is getting a new job, and for another person, it's climbing Everest, and for another person, it's deep sea diving, whatever it is. But I think the thing that defines it is that you've left your own personal comfort zone, and you're amongst numerous unknowns, I suppose, is how I would define it.
Great definition. And, when you think about adventure and you think about, the lifestyle you've built and your professional climber status and obligations and all the rest, why is adventure important to you? And you kind of sit down and maybe actually when you forget about all that other stuff and you just think, why is it that I feel compelled to live life like this?
I think I'm someone who I'm really curious, and I want to be learning stuff in whatever I do. And I think that if I'm not learning something new, if I'm not making new discoveries either about myself or about the world, then it's not really that worthwhile an endeavor. So for me, having adventures are just fun ways to learn.
Fun ways to learn. I like that.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. There is no right answer, as they all say. So I guess, in kind of maybe a slightly parallel track or maybe an opposing track, if there was one thing, if you could somehow place yourself out towards the end of your life, whenever that is, hopefully very, very, very far out. Always. What would be the one thing you would sort of like to be remembered by or about? Would it be, and I'm maybe sort of loading the question here, but would it be any specific kind of climbing achievement or climbing related thing, or is it something completely different?
I don't know. I actually don't care at all how I'm remembered, really.
Interesting.
I mean,
tell me more.
I think whoever my family is when I die, I want them to remember me fondly. The people who actually know me as a person, I want them to remember me fondly and not think ill of me. That would be important to me. But in terms of fame or legacy, that stuff just doesn't interest me at all.
So if you get to the end and, you feel like you have great relationships with your family and you feel like you've lived a full life full of, adventures big and small, and you've learned tons along the way, that'll be enough.
Yeah, I guess, one thing maybe I could add to that would be it would be cool to have taught someone something, because I do have pretty unusual life and I get to experience a lot of cool stuff that other people don't get to experience. And maybe I have learned something useful from that. So I suppose it would be nice to have shared that as much as I could have.
Well, it sounds like you are very much already on the way to sharing plenty of that knowledge.
Thanks.
And I think I will just, it sounds like as good a place as any to call it. I think we've had a great conversation and I've totally learned a lot from you. So thank you for the time. And I hope your trip in the coming days goes well and all the travel in 2019 goes well as well.
Thanks a lot. It's been fun chatting to you.
Yeah, you too. See you, Hazel.
Bye.
And that's it for this episode. If you enjoyed what you heard, please subscribe. And if you're willing to wade through the mess that is iTunes, I would be eternally grateful for any reviews that showed up on the podcast there. That always helps us find more listeners. You can also check us out on Instagram. I've been posting a ton of old photos there, and it's been really great fun to look through the old archives and pull stuff out. Hopefully you'll enjoy those as well. So until next time, I'm Jeff Gardner, and I am signing off Lives of Adventure.